got cause to be. There's a name for it. There's a phrase that is. But whatever the reason, you do it for me. Oh, what's love got to do? Got to do with it.
Exactly. I'm telling you, when you start putting love into the legal definition, what happens? You got chaos. You got lawlessness because you can't put it in a calculator, okay? So Tina's little friend here has got a point. Let's get rid of her for a minute. Pardon me. Yeah, boom. Okay, so the deal is, yeah, when you start, this is what has happened in the 60s, which is why we're here talking today. Love has been injected into the legal definition of marriage, which has created this Father Alar video number 2. Actually, this is the original one of crazy. Okay, and we're going to try to debunk it, go through it, whatever. I don't want to sit here and do this, but we got to do it. Somebody's got to do it, and no one is. Welcome to another Sunday night edition of Annulment Proof. John Farrell, the only place on YouTube where marriage gets defined. You be sure to give me a super hard time in the comment section when you hear me say something wrong, too. All right? And you can do like and subscribe and whatever. So listen, this stupid video, I shouldn't say it. It's long. We're going to try to do it at 2x and try not to go back and forth to the sources. I'm just going to say what's true. And if you think I'm wrong, I will prove it to you in the comments. And then you can go from there, whatever you want to do. And I don't back down or stop arguing. In other words, if it takes 6 months, so long, fine. We're going to do that to discuss something, okay? Which is, I think, the only difference between me and everyone else out there. Let us go ahead and bring on our star, Father Alar. Bro, what happened? Here. Okay. Let's push him up. I'll make me smaller a little bit here. Okay. Here we go. We're going to get through this as quick as we can, like I said.
Best place for us to start is with the quote from Scripture about what Jesus said regarding marriage and divorce. There's a couple places in the Gospel. I'll be reading from Mark chapter 10, verse 2 through 10. Some Pharisees approached him and tested him, saying, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause whatever?" He said in reply, "Have you not read from the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate." They said to him, "Then why did Moses command that the man give the woman a bill of divorce and dismiss her?" He said to them, "Because of the hardness of your hearts."
Okay, yes. This is the main difference here. Moses allowed divorce, okay? Everyone knows that. Because of the hardness of their hearts, because those frickin' Israelites would off their wife if they wouldn't get, that's the way to end your marriage, is from death, so they just push her off a cliff, okay? So because their hearts were hard, but then Jesus comes and says, no more of that. If you want to put your wife away, which is the physical separation, then you can do that. But you can never divorce after Moses. In other words, New Testament is no divorce where the marriage ceases to exist. You can put away, but you can't divorce. All right? And there's a lot of confusion out there because people use the word divorce and put away and they interchange it. The Bible translations are goofed up. You got to go to the Douay Rheims. At any rate, that's the short story on that. Moses allowed divorce. Our Lord Jesus Christ did not allow and does not allow divorce. He allows separation with the bond remaining only. Okay? I got another something to say about that, but we'll keep going.
Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, and marries another, he commits adultery.
Yeah, unless the marriage is unlawful, that means, that's one translation, but the Douay Rheims says unless per fornication. So you can put away your spouse. If they act immorally, you can put them away, but you can never divorce. You can never say ex-spouse. Marriage is still death. You can separate, but you can't divorce, okay?
Wow, okay, this is a very tough teaching, but again, the words of Jesus. Let's unpack this for a while, and let's try to understand this. Let's start with our next slide. What is marriage? All right, we can have marriages in many forms. I come from a military family, so you see there's a
Chick
good
stress
example of
is a
beautiful
bit
marriage.
much,
What is
I
it?
think.
We
Let's
just
get,
read that God created man in his image as male and female. This goes back to Genesis, right? 1:27. And he said the two become one flesh. We just read that. Marriage is a total commitment in love. What is
Marriage is not a total commitment in love. Marriage is a contract for rights. That's what it is. And those rights, right to the conjugal act. That's all it is. Sorry, Timothy Gordon, it's not unitive. It's just procreative. That's it, okay? Unitive is the feminist part. Sorry, here we go. Let's keep going. Whoop, did I?
Down upon us to open our minds and hearts to receive the grace
I
you wish to
accidentally hit the wrong
bestow.
button.
I go back through all my notes. I do my
wait.
process of becoming
Hold on, let me find out
engaged
where we
and
were.
getting
My
married
fault.
and those
Just a second.
unfortunate- Wow. Okay. This
All
is
right, here we go.
very
Let's keep
tough
going.
teaching, but again, the words of Jesus. Let's unpack this for a while, and let's try to understand this. Let's start with our next slide. What is marriage?
Oh, we already saw
All
this.
right,
Okay,
we can
sorry,
have
yeah.
marriages in many forms. I come from a military
Dude.
family, so you see here's a good example of a beautiful marriage. What is it? All right. We just read that God created man
Yikes.
in his image as male and female. This goes back to Genesis, right? 1:27. And he said the two become one flesh. We just read that. Marriage is a total commitment in love.
No,
What
it's
is love?
not.
Love is willing the good of the other, always wishing their good in all circumstances.
That's what love is,
It's
but
a
that's not what
complete
marriage
giving
is.
and receiving. It's not just giving. That's why many marriages fail, because there's no receiving. We need both that reciprocal giving and receiving for marriage to work. It's
Okay,
like
marriage can work. The relationship can work. The relationship could not work. But marriage is what it is, which is a contract for rights. But once you have to legalize NFP, then you've heard me say this before, and he's going to touch on this. He touches on NFP too, because he knows that contraception affects the definition of marriage. In fact, it's the hinge that created all this problem.
the love within the Trinity, a complete giving and receiving. Now,
Okay,
don't worry-
yeah, marriage, the Trinity can be a sign of marriage, or Christ in his church is a sign of marriage, but it is not the nature of marriage, okay? This is where the confusion comes. The Trinitarian love is not the love between the husband and wife. Marriage, like I said, is a rights contract. This visionary significance stuff is used to try to transplant nature. Okay, it doesn't work. You can't make it work, but they're trying to, because they're trying to recreate the purpose of marriage to eliminate procreation to accommodate NFP.
worry, this whole talk is not going to be sitting here telling you that you shouldn't have gotten a divorce. That's not what
It
I'm
should
about to
be,
tell
because you
today.
shouldn't have gotten the
I'm about
divorce.
to tell you what is maybe happening in our world and our culture that is causing so many divorces, and when the church does allow it.
The culture is not causing divorces because people today know what permanence is, just like they did 100 years ago. They know what separation is. They know what exclusivity means. They know where babies come from. What's going on is we've changed the law in practice. Vatican II didn't change anything. The spirit of Vatican II changed the law. Therefore, when you say love's got something to do with it, then it can change. It can go all over the place. Permanence and love in the legal definition cannot coexist. And the results are on the wall. 300 annulments before Vatican II in the USA, 80,000 after Vatican II. It's a legal change. That's it.
And when it doesn't. So again, please, nothing personal here. Let's keep going now. That love being a complete giving and receiving is really a good example of why contraception is not allowed by the church. People
See?
don't understand that. Do you know up into the 1930s, every Christian church forbid contraception?
Yes, we knew that.
Now only the Catholic Church is the last one that says that. Oh, Father, I can't handle that. I can't deal with that. Well, the reason why
Just so you know, yeah, in 1930, the Anglicans okayed contraception, but they changed the nature of marriage from nature to duty. They're saying procreation is no longer just nature, it is now duty, which means there can be exceptions to it, which is why there's the conflict.
contraception is wrong is because it puts a barrier between that complete giving and receiving of love.
Bro, you sound like some, sorry, I shouldn't say, Father Alar, you sound like kind of a new agey guy. Contraception is wrong because it stops increase and multiply. Nothing new under the sun. We have reinvented why contraception is wrong, because it stops this flow of love. Only if love is the primary purpose, but it's not. Sorry to disappoint the spirit of Vatican II. Love is not the purpose of marriage. Procreation is. Procreation and education of children.
In the marital act, I'm not completely giving of myself if I'm a husband.
No one can completely give themselves. However, the marriage contract is the right over the body for acts. That's it.
to my wife because it's blocked. In the same way, the wife is not completely receiving if there's that barrier of contraception.
Christopher
all right?
West,
Contraception in a way
whatever.
says, one spouse says to the other, I love you, but I don't love you enough to have another one like you in the world. Well, but Father, we can't have another child right now. The church understands that. There are other things like natural family planning that can address those issues. That's a topic in another talk I'll be doing called Theology of the Body. So stay tuned.
Oh, no
in the
wonder.
following few
Yeah, that's
Saturdays.
feminism.
I'll be talking about sexuality and the
Because
human body
it's
and
unity.
more on contraception
Unity
called
is
Theology
required.
of the
Therefore,
Body.
I got to feel it.
All right. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway.
Here's the thing.
You guys can
Marriage
put
is
in the
sacred,
comments on that if you
and
want.
it is elevated to the level of a sacrament. That's what St. Paul taught us in Ephesians 5. Okay? Paul said, boy, this is the priest's worst nightmare, right? When he has to teach on this on a Sunday homily with a full church. Wives, be submissive to your husbands. And husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Now, I want you to stay tuned because I'm actually going to try to tackle that famous
If marriage is a rights
explain to you-
contract, you cannot get Ephesians 5 right, because if you have a right to, if marriage is a love contract, because if it's rights, you can say people have the right to the right over the body for acts. But if marriage is unity, then you have to, everything has to be, quote, unitive, and no one defines that. In other words, I got to feel it. Therefore, there's no more conjugal rights. It's always mutual consent, always. Okay. And therefore there can be no more, wives be submissive to your husbands. It's all this equal partnership baloney. Once you change any little thing in the Catholic Church, in the Catholic faith, everything else has to be changed with it. You can't move one Lego and leave all the rest. They have to move everything. That's why we're sitting here talking about this garbage, because you have redefined all of marriage when you say NFP is licit. That's the linchpin of it all. It's where it started.
I can tell you, I bet you don't know what it really, in the sense of what it really means. I bet it's something different than what you think it means. So stay with us, because at the end of this talk, I want to explain that. What does Christ mean, or Paul mean, when he says, wives, be submissive or subordinate to your husbands? It's not what you think. All right. Marriage obviously is a covenant. Remember, a contract is an exchange of goods, but
marriage isn't obviously a covenant. In fact, it's a contract. The word marriage covenant never existed before Protestantism. But when the Protestants fired their bishop, they have no way to obtain earthly justice. So they call it a covenant, because that way it's God is the guarantor of the rights, not man, aka the bishop. So no Catholic ever called marriage a covenant until after Vatican II. Because if marriage is love, it has no rights, it has no legal definition, therefore divorce violates nothing. Therefore, we have to call it a covenant and not a contract, because a contract means someone's got to guarantee those rights. And we're saying that there are no rights because love is number one on this, okay? That's the problem.
a covenant is an exchange of persons. All right.
Marriage is not an exchange of persons. It's an exchange of bodily rights, not an exchange of persons. It's crazy. Otherwise, any marriage can be done away with if you say you're not capable of giving me your person.
And it's a covenant between a man and a woman which establishes a partnership for life.
No one
Now-
can define partnership either, and marriage is not a partnership because wives be submissive to your husbands is not partnership, okay? And husbands love your wives, that's not partnership. That's just reflects the way the church is governed is the way the marriage is governed. The church and Jesus are not a partnership. My little kitty cat is scratching hard. He wants to come in. Let's let him in for a minute. All right, no problem. He chickened out. He's making noise. We'll keep going.
For the baptized, if you are baptized, marriage is indissoluble and nobody can cancel that bond, not even the church. Well, Father, there's divorces in the church. We're going to get to that. So stay with us. All right. Civil divorce in the government or the state affects the legality of marriage, but not the sacramental reality of marriage. So the church doesn't get involved in the civil legal aspect of marriage, but
That's a huge problem. That's a heresy right there. The church doesn't get involved in the civil aspect of marriage and separation. Okay. Child custody, separation of spouses, conjugal rights, those are not mere civil effects. A mere civil effect of separation is tax filing status, okay? Last names in the state, stuff like that. Those are mere civil effects. But education of children, when do you see your own kids? What religion do you get to teach of them? Who do they get exposed to? Do you get daily access to your kids? Who pays for stuff? Those are not mere civil effects. This is the heresy, okay? But when you put love in the definition, everything goes out the window.
It does in church law. And that's what the sacrament of marriage is about. All right, there was a guy named Dietrich von Hildebrand, who I studied a lot in.
Don't get me started on old Dietrich.
Seminary. Read his book, Transformation in Christ and Others.
He's got a crazy quote somewhere. I've got to find these Dietrich von Hildebrand quotes, but he basically is the one who got started with this marriage is love thing. It's bad. He says a lot of cool stuff and good stuff, but he's the one who kind of pushed and got the political pressure to get the NFP. Ultimately, marriage is love, la, 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 and it just ruined it.
We should distinguish between the meaning of marriage. What's the meaning of marriage? Obviously, love. And its purpose. The purpose of marriage, the three objectives of marriage. And those are, we'll get to in a minute. But marriage is one of the three major vocations. You know the other two, the single life and the
marriage is
consecrated
not a
religious
vocation.
Life. Marriage is one of those huge vocation callings that most people are called to. Now, let's look at this. Let's put up our next slide. The three objectives of marriage that I just mentioned. All right, what are the three objectives of marriage? They are unity.
They're just making this stuff up. Okay, with the three objectives? No, it's a purpose. You've got the procreative purpose. The unitive purpose has no definition, and basically that means flesh. Those are secondary ends. So you get procreation, access to flesh, good of the spouses, whatever. That's secondary. It's not, so it's not essential. And get your spouse to heaven isn't natural. There's nothing. So marriage is nature. Marriage is legal. Yes, you need to get your spouse to heaven, but that's not a purpose of. That is not a purpose of natural marriage. All right. So he's combining this stuff in a blender. This is the problem. Hang on. Let's keep going.
Procreative, unitive, and get your spouse to heaven. Why? All right. Let's start with procreation. When spouses conceive new life, they participate in God's creative power. We are to be procreative. That's one of the conditions for valid marriage, is that it's open to life. Unitive, the union, makes the husband and the wife become one flesh, as Jesus just said in the gospel we read. All right. This is Genesis 2:24. I counsel a lot of marriage couples, and I do have to tell you this. Do you know that in every couple that I counsel, there's two things that I see that are lacking in every marriage that is failing and are present in every marriage that is succeeding? The two things are prayer and the conjugal act. In every marriage that I've seen that has failed, they were not praying together and they were not engaging in the marital act, the union. And in every marriage I see that is thriving.
The marital act is not the union, okay? Unitive is a word that you can use. It's like tofu. You can put anything you want in it, and that's what they're doing.
They are praying together and they are engaging in the marital act, union. All right. So now the third is to get your spouse to heaven.
Procreative is the marital act. Bro, dude.
Ultimate love. This is the ultimate love, because the love is defined as willing the good of the other, and there's no greater good than getting your spouse to heaven. Right? There is no way that these three things can't be our focus in a marriage, or it's not going to work. And so now those three things, this is interesting. I did a talk a few weeks ago. Do you know that's why Jesus said there's no marriage in heaven? Now, when I say that, some people are like, oh.
Because they don't need to reproduce, that's why.
There's no marriage, Jesus said, in heaven. It'll be like the angels. Why? Because there's no need for those three things. There's no need to procreate, because in heaven, everybody lives eternally. There's no need for the sexual union, because again, there's no need to procreate, have more children. And also, you'll have the perfect union with God himself. And then third,
it's not about union.
Because once we die, we're either there or we're not. We can't change that.
It's one flesh, because you can't separate.
We don't have a bond, a special bond with our spouses in heaven. You will. That's a beautiful gift. But that's the more importance of understanding the objectives of marriage. Now, let's go to our next slide. This is one of my favorite writers. This is Dietrich von Hildebrand. And I read his stuff. He's a great philosopher. And his wife, Alice, I read a lot of their work, had them in courses in college. And I want to talk about their words about the meaning of marriage. Remember, I said there's the meaning and then there's the purpose. The meaning of marriage is love, and the purpose is procreative, unitive, and get your spouse to heaven. And I'm going to read you a couple excerpts from what Alice, his wife, and Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote. So just stay with me here. I want to read some of these with you. There are a few paragraphs. A person truly in love wants to bind himself forever to his beloved, which is precisely the gift that marriage gives. In contrast, love without an unqualified commitment, that commitment is marriage, betrays the very essence of love. He who refuses to commit himself, or who breaks a commitment in order to start another relationship, fools himself. He confuses the excitement of novelty with real happiness. Many people criticize marriage because they say it takes away freedom. They fail to realize that a person exercises his freedom when he freely binds himself to another in marriage. Doesn't that seem ironic? That you think you're free when you're not married, but actually he says you're actually freer when you are married, because you bind yourself to someone in love. He said freedom is not the ability, remember this, freedom is not the ability to do whatever we want. That's license. Societies can't function with that. That means people could just kill at will, or steal at will. It's not freedom. Freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. As I said, that's license. But the ability to do what you ought to do. And what you ought to do, they say, is give and receive love. Now, sometimes if your spouse is not reciprocating, that's not your fault, and we're going to talk about that.
That's
We
cool
must
and all,
bind
but
ourselves
that's
through sacred
not
vows
legally
so that
what
the bond will
marriage
be blessed
is.
by God and grant our love the strength necessary to face the difficulties of our human condition. This is really powerful. What they're saying is that when your love is sacred and blessed by God, you'll be given extra grace to weather the storm. All right, 2 small other paragraphs. In a relationship without sacred commitment, meaning without the marriage vows sacramental, the slightest obstacle may be an excuse for separating. Unfortunately, man, who is usually so eager to win a fight over others, shows little or no desire to conquer himself. It is much easier for him to give up a relationship than to fight. Marriage calls each spouse to fight against oneself for the sake of his beloved. Pretty interesting. This is why it has become so unpopular today. People are willing to achieve the greatest of all victories, but not when it comes to victory over self. Isn't that amazing? People are not willing to achieve what is the greatest of all victories.
Okay, bro.
victory
Okay, so
over
yeah,
self.
let's go.
St. Paul, he went on to say, this is my last section, illuminated the dignity of sacramental marriage in calling it a great mystery. And he compared it to the love that Christ has for his church. Remember, who's the groom? Jesus. Who's the bride? The church. This is Ephesians. Natural love pales in comparison. What is natural love? Love that is not put under the hand of God. Natural love pales in comparison to the beauty of a love rooted in Christ. How do we get that love rooted in Christ? The sacraments. As a sacrament, marriage gives people the supernatural strength necessary to fight the good fight. Every victory achieved together over habit, routine, or boredom cements the bonds existing between the spouses and makes their love produce fruit. Natural marriage has a love that is earthly, but sacramental marriage, that means the marriage in the church with God, has love that is supernatural.
Fine.
Sorry to bore you with all that reading,
It's
but I
not
need to listen
boring.
to those
That's
words. It's
fine.
incredible.
It's
Let's
good.
go on to the next slide. What are the types of marriage? There are 2 types of marriage, based on what I just read. The
Natural
first
and
is natural
sacramental
or
are the
earthly, which is
same.
like the justice of the peace, or by the captain of a boat.
As far
That
as
doesn't mean that marriage isn't valid. The church does not say that. A church says a natural marriage is very valid. If you get married to the justice of the peace, the church, surprisingly to many people, does not say that's invalid. It's valid, but it doesn't have the supernatural grace of your second one, the sacramental marriage. All right? What determines a natural marriage from a sacramental marriage? Believe it or not, it's nothing you do in preparation for the marriage. You know what it has everything to do with? If you're
Baptism.
baptized or not.
Yep, that's right.
All right. To get a sacramental marriage or a natural marriage depends if you're baptized. Now, if one or both of the spouses are not baptized, the marriage is valid, but it is not sacramental. It is just natural or earthly. Now, as long as there's no impediments of the law, the marriage is still valid. So here, the church recognized the marriage of non-Catholics as valid marriages in an earthly sense. Many people say the
should have
church doesn't recognize
fast-forwarded all
it
this.
because it wasn't
Sorry, I
in the
didn't
church.
know it was
The
gonna
church
go on
recognizes
like
that
this.
marriage is an earthly or natural marriage. This applies to no matter how or where they were married, in a Baptist church or in the justice of the peace or on a ship out to sea. Thus, if they had previous marriages and now they want to marry someone in the Catholic Church, they will actually need an annulment. This is surprising. I found this out personally firsthand. I was engaged to be married.
Sorry
to a
sorry
wonderful girl
for,
in North Carolina, and she had a previous marriage. And I thought, well,
see,
gee, she
this
wasn't
is
married in the
long
Catholic
and
Church. I
long
don't need
and
an
goes
annulment. Well,
on.
actually, I
We
would
gotta
have,
get going
because she was
through
baptized
this.
and married in the Baptist church.
I don't
we
want
see
to
the church
fast forward
recognizes
too
this.
much because
So
I'll
they
miss
actually
something
need these
good.
annulments. Now, does the church say that these marriages can be dissolved? Well, no marriage in essence can be dissolved. Jesus just said they can't be. So we're going to look in a minute what an annulment says about a marriage that maybe didn't have all the elements of a sacrament. But for right now, if you have an unbaptized person, if one is unbaptized and later they want to become a Catholic, but they were married previously, they can get something called the Pauline privilege.
Yeah,
which
who
actually can
cares?
dissolve the marriage of 2
It's
persons
boring.
if
We
one
don't
was
care
not
about
baptized at the
Pauline
time of marriage. Now, if
whatever.
both were not baptized, there's something called the Petrine privilege, or the privilege of faith.
Yeah,
And this is where you
okay.
can dissolve a valid natural marriage between a baptized and a non-baptized person. And I'm sorry, the Pauline was if you're both unbaptized. My mistake. So the Pauline is if you have both unbaptized. The Petrine is if one
Right,
is
it's,
unbaptized and one is
it's
baptized. All right, so
a tiny,
we're not going to get into
tiny
that right now, but what we're going to do is we're going to jump to what is the sacramental marriage. All right. If you have 2 validly baptized people who get married, they don't have any impediments, like, they were only 11 years old or it was a shotgun wedding, those are impediments.
Whatever.
As long as you don't have that and you have a validly baptized people who were married, it is sacramental. You mean it's sacramental, Father, even if it's not in the Catholic Church? Surprisingly, yes. You mean if my cousin is Baptist and she got married to another Baptist in the Baptist Church, that's sacramental? Yes. All right, Father, wait a minute. If I have 2 baptized people and they get married to the justice of the peace, that is sacramental?
Yes.
Surprising, isn't it? Because it's all
No.
determined by baptism. So if you have 2 baptized people who get married, it is sacramental. This kind of marriage cannot receive a divorce based on the words of Jesus. Let no man separate what God has
Correct.
joined. So how do we explain all this? Okay, this is where it's going to get a little tricky, but stay with me. There is no such thing as a Catholic divorce. Okay?
There's no
What
such thing
happens
as any
is
divorce.
called a decree of nullity. We popularly refer to it as an annulment, but that's actually probably not the best way to say it. We should say decree of nullity. But for the sake of simplicity today, I'll be saying annulment. So what happens is an annulment is given to show that there was actually not marriage in the first place because there was some condition that didn't allow there to be a true marriage. An annulment shows that something needed was actually lacking at the time of marriage. We're going to go through that. Now, there possibly also could have been an impediment, meaning like, somebody was already married to somebody else, or they were under the age for a boy 16,
Sorry
a girl
this
14.
takes so
That's an
long.
impediment. That marriage
He'll
isn't
get to
valid.
this
All right?
part.
So even if there was an impediment,
It's such a long
meaning
video.
they weren't legally allowed to get married, and by the church's definition. But that does not mean the children are illegitimate. I'm going to be talking about that. Don't worry. That does not, as I will explain later, mean your children are illegitimate, even though an annulment says that this marriage.
Yeah, your kids are not illegitimate after you get the annulment because the babies were produced in a putative marriage, which is legal. Also, your sin of divorce was produced in a putative marriage. So your kids remain legitimate and your divorce sin remains public and legitimate after the annulment. Uh, um, I guess it's public. I mean, you still have to make restitution for it. In other words, you cannot. The annulment does not whitewash or get rid of the sin of divorce, just like it doesn't whitewash or get rid of the legitimacy of your kids.
did not properly occur, your children are not illegitimate. Very important. If a non-baptized person are later baptized, so they had a natural marriage, and then later they are baptized, their marriage goes from natural to sacramental. Pretty powerful stuff, huh? All right, so let's get on now to the next slide. What makes a sacramental marriage? Father, you keep talking about the sacramental marriage, but what makes it? Before we get into divorce and annulments, it's important that I explain what the sacramental marriage is. Then you'll better understand what a divorce and an annulment do. All right, a number of elements must happen to come together for a valid sacrament of marriage to occur. All right, let's go through this. Let's put up our first slide. The elements that must be present for a sacramental marriage.
Canonical
right?
form, of course.
Yeah. Canonical
They
form.
must
That's just a
understand
big
what
word
marriage
meaning you're
is.
married in the church. You're married if you're a baptized
Dude.
Catholic. You need to get married in the Catholic Church. This isn't my opinion.
Everyone knows
this. Isn't
this.
me imposing my will upon you. Please understand, I'm
Stop.
just telling you what the church
Stop.
teaches.
Hurry up.
But we're gonna explain. There's ways that you can help yourself, and don't panic on me because. Oh my
But I
gosh,
can't
wasn't in the
fast
Catholic
forward
Church.
too
There's ways
much
to
because
help
I'll
you
miss
to be
chunks
able
of
to get
something
through that,
good.
All right. Now, basically, canonical form just means getting married in the church.
Yeah.
If one of the spouses is baptized Catholic, not even both, just one, the couple must marry in the church or have permission to marry somewhere else. Now, sometimes people say, well, Father, we're first going to get married in the Catholic Church. You're never going to get married in the Baptist Church. Actually, sorry, but the church says we can't do that. You can't get married twice. Because the marriage in a Baptist church is actually valid. So if you get married first in the Catholic Church, you can't go get married again in the Baptist church. It's not because the church is trying to be mean, but it's because we can't get married twice, and the church recognizes that Protestant wedding is valid. All right. This does not apply though for non-Catholics. We can't ask non-Catholics to be married inside the Catholic Church.
Maybe I'll try to
when they're
fast forward a little bit because
non-Catholics.
it's too boring.
List of elements that must be present. They must freely and knowingly choose it. All right. We can't have shotgun weddings or somebody marrying another person to get them citizenship. Neither is considered free consent. You have to freely consent. All right. The next one. They must understand about marriage, and this is interesting, that it is lifelong and open to children. A lot of people don't understand the commitment of marriage. You maybe have been in a marriage where your spouse was immature or didn't understand the first thing of what it meant to be the commitment of marriage. Therefore,
Immature commitment of marriage. Bro, if you know where babies come from and you can kind of do that, that's all the maturity you need, which is why they say this level of understanding is expected and implied and understood after puberty, which is why girls at 14, boys at 16 can get married in the church. That's all you got to know. Because procreation is primary. But if love's got something to do with it, you need to keep Tina Turner happy her whole life. And that's a tall order. Right on?
you may have grounds for something that is not a sacramental marriage, and therefore grounds for an annulment. All of these are grounds, if they're not present, are grounds for an annulment. I'm telling you what makes up a sacramental marriage. If any of these are not present, that means there's grounds for an annulment, meaning the marriage was not properly valid, not meaning your children will be illegitimate. Again,
I
I'll
think
explain
my
that.
cat's
But there was
rolling
something
around
missing in the
upstairs.
marriage at the
That's
time it
what
took
I
place
hear.
that should have been there. That's what we're talking about right here. All right, number 3, I just read that. They must be also open to children. Let's go to the next slide. All right, number 4, they must intend fidelity to each other. This is a problem. Some people marry their spouses and have no intent in being faithful and monogamous. They continue affairs or relationships with other people, physical. Number 5, they must have the physical and psychological ability to follow through with their intentions.
All you need to be able to do is, if you want to say I'm open to life, then you got to kind of produce the life or the acts. You know what I'm saying? That's it. You don't need, ain't no psychological nothing. Hello?
Sometimes people are not mentally capable of fulfilling the role of a spouse, and they dove into it maybe too quickly, and the church recognizes that. If somebody's been
Mentally
abusive
capable.
to you,
Dang, I
if
just
somebody
can't make
has
the baby.
been-
I don't know
has
what's
hurt
going
you,
on.
has-
Whoa!
who treats you
That's why the
beyond
annulment is
human,
fake. Most of
dignity,
them. Almost all of them.
This means that there may not have been the mental and psychological capacity in that person to be your spouse. And therefore, that marriage really, truly didn't happen and wasn't meant to be.
Bro. Okay, so all he's really saying is when you feel bad, get a divorce. It's cool. Get an annulment because it's not meant to be. This guy is an enemy of marriage. And why do I say enemy? Because Casti Canubi, I think it's 78, says these enemies of marriage allow you to go ahead and get a divorce without the bishop's permission. You just go right over to the state. And that's exactly what he says.
I think that's the case many fall into. All right, and then number 6, the marriage must have been consummated, meaning the sexual act or the marital act happened, except in a Josephite marriage. This is like Mary and Joseph.
What goes up must come down. Consummation is a word that means to finish. Okay, so if consummation is the marriage act, then that's all you consented to. You consent to what you consummate. If you consent to a partnership of life and love, of deep psychological whatever, then you only consummate that at death. I asked a tribunal about that too, and they admitted, yeah, consummation only happens at death because marriage is a partnership of life and love, according to the Spirit of Vatican II. So just like abortion is a word that doesn't necessarily mean killing a baby, consummation is a word that doesn't necessarily mean the marriage act, but it means to finish. So to finish what you started, they redefined what starts a marriage, so they redefine consummation, but they don't tell you that.
Where they go to the bishop, and not today, they go to the bishop, Mary and Joseph didn't, but they live a life of pure chastity and celibacy. That's a different topic for a different time. All right, when you have all of these 6 things, you have a valid, sacramental, indissoluble union. This is what Jesus was talking about. So to summarize them all, they fall into 3 categories. The 3 things that you need present for a true valid marriage are the capacity to make the commitment, psychologically or physically. I have to have physical capacity to engage in the marital act. I have to have the mental capacity to treat my human spouse with dignity.
Kill me, bro. You have to have the mental capacity to treat my human spouse with dignity. Okay. How much mental capacity do you need? What is dignity? What is the legal definition? This is all made up garbage that never existed before 1965. For the history of marriage, everyone knew divorce was wrong and marriages stayed together. Why? Because the law said so in the church and in the state. Then once you bring contraception in and you start bringing NFP in, all the Protestants and all the Catholics start saying marriage is love, therefore you now need psychological capacity, not only for making babies, but to keep Tina Turner happy or something, which is impossible. Basically,
Consent.
I shouldn't say it's impossible. If somebody wants out, they have all the intellectual backing they want. They can just wreck the thing and they can say, my spouse is incapable. Boom. I get a new model. That's all this is. And Father Alar is working to destroy the permanence of marriage because he's got to keep the NFP going. And he probably feels guilty about it a little bit. His sister, too. We're going to talk about that in a second.
The person must freely say yes and not be forced into it. And then finally, the first one, canonical form, married in the church. Do you realize that the Pope said that probably over 50% of Catholic marriages in the United States are invalid? The Pope said that. That probably over 50% of the Catholic marriages in the United States are invalid. Why? Because they're not in the Catholic Church. Therefore, they're lacking canonical.
The Pope says the vast majority, the great majority of marriages are invalid, and it's not because they're not in the church. It's because the Pope says marriage is love, and that's anyone who isn't loving, like total self-gift, boom, invalid. That's why.
Form. And therefore, they don't have the element of the sacrament. That would be grounds for a non-sacramental marriage. All right, so let's go to the next slide. How is marriage entered into? This is where it really gets fascinating. The husband and the wife enter into vows with each other, which are greater than promises. Why? Vows involve greater accountability and sacredness than promises. All right, what do I mean by that? All right, I might promise to cook you dinner every single night. I could say to you, I'm going to cook you dinner every night. I promise. That's my promise to you. But sometimes, rarely, a certain circumstance might come up that I may have to break that promise. I might say, oh my gosh, my provincial wanted to meet with me tonight. I'm sorry, I can't cook dinner. But if I vow before God and others that I will love and honor you all the days of my life, and which is basically what you do at a wedding, circumstances should never cause me to break that vow. I am held to a greater accountability by God and the community.
That's right. You don't get to break your vow and go to heaven. That's right. And if you vow to love, you have to do that, okay? That's correct. That's not the marriage contract, but it is a vow.
Solemn vow, that's what vows are. Almost all cultures hold vows as sacred as compared to everyday promises. All right, they often involve visible signs
vow
of the vow,
means
like
God's
rings,
in charge
or for religious,
of it.
sometimes you see them shave their head in a tonsure, they call it, like Friar Tuck, right? Vows are also a mirror of God's promises to us. Why are vows so powerful? Because they mirror God's promises to us through his covenants, sending Jesus Christ, his son, to earth, through the gospel, the institution of the church. God freely and deliberately committed to us. So our vows mirror that. So the Catholic marriage vows are based on this.
We're making decent time here.
It's a declaration of consent. The priest will ask you 3 questions. If you remember back to the day, right? James and Janet, have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? And you answer, I have, meaning free consent. He says, are you prepared as you follow the path of marriage to love and honor each other as long as you both shall live? And you say, I have. And you say, are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and bring them up according to the law of Christ and his church? And you say, I am, or I have. That's the power of the vow. But we know certain circumstances get in the way. This is our next slide. What about this? Is a divorce allowed by the Catholic Church when all else has failed? Everything tried, Father, I've tried everything to
Oh,
reconcile.
this
You
is
talk about
gonna
all this
get
love and these vows.
choppy.
Father, my spouse is completely distant from me. He doesn't relate to me. He's not present to me. He's failed in his obligations to me.
Oh, no!
My spouse has abandoned me. You're telling me that my spouse abuses me. You're telling me the church says I have to live with this? Well, let's talk about that.
Duh. No. Listen, kids deserve an intact home. Your spouse gets crazy, you can never, ever divorce. Divorce is Old Testament trash, okay? You can legally separate, or you can. All 50 states have legal separation or equivalent. That's what you can do, but you can't divorce. No divorce. By the way, any tribunal can, in fact, do an annulment trial without a civil divorce. There is no law in the church. It's just a dumb bishop rule because they don't want to adjudicate the separation. They're supposed to adjudicate it because when you're baptized, the bishop is the one who decides alimony and child support and custody and who gets the house and the dog and the kids and all that. Not the state, because you're baptized. Sorry?
Because it gets delicate. Do I need to put my crash helmet back on? All right.
Whatever.
Here's where it gets tricky, because let's look at the next slide. What does Jesus say? Jesus says, they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate. Matthew 19:6. I don't know about you, but I don't want to battle the words of Jesus. Now, the church has found ways to accommodate those problems and still not violate the words of Jesus. You may not like the way the church does it, but let me tell you, the church has pushed as far as it could in protection of spouses who can't live together and still not violate the words of Christ. Christ's words are pretty firm there. It's almost like he's saying there's no circumstances. He says nobody. He says, what God has joined together, no human being will celebrate. So what about the civil divorce? When the state recognizes that a couple is divorced by law, how does the church address it? All right, this does not affect the sacramental nature of the marriage. It affects the legal nature. That's a civil divorce. So there's still validity. Even after a civil divorce, there's still the validity of a marriage. Then why, Father Chris, did Moses allow divorce, like we read in the opening scripture passage? Why did Moses allow divorce? Remember, Jesus said that it wasn't always that way because of your hardness of heart. But he didn't explain fully, and I want to share with you why Moses did. It was to provide legal protection to the woman.
Think about that. Moses allowed divorce to provide legal protection for the women. He allowed divorce because the women would be killed. That's why. But this is where he stretches Old Testament law and tries to make it New Testament law. It gets kind of weird here.
So you see, there's precedent here that one of the spouses needed to get protection. Now, Jesus said it was because of your stubbornness. He didn't mean the victim. He meant the one who's not taking care of his spouse. So usually in a divorce, there's usually one person.
No, he meant the victim. That's whatever. That's why he allows it. Moses allowed it because they just kill your wife. You want a new wife? Boom, kill her.
At fault. There's usually an innocent victim.
All right, we got to back up on this. Sorry.
So you see, there's precedent here that one of the spouses needed to get protection. Now, Jesus said it was because of your stubbornness. He didn't mean the victim. He meant the one who's not taking care of his spouse. So usually in a divorce, there's usually one person at fault.
In a divorce, quote unquote, which means a civil divorce, he says there's usually one person at fault. There's only one person at fault, the person who filed, or the person who didn't file. If they did something grave enough, they're at fault. But no one can judge that except ecclesiastical judges. Okay?
There's usually an innocent victim, and then there's usually one at fault. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be both guilty.
There's no, this guy's crazy. If there's always guilt, or there can be no justified divorce, therefore, whoever files is guilty. By the way, whoever does file is guilty until proven innocent.
Both could be guilty.
If both are guilty, only one can be guilty of divorce. There can be guilt all over the place, but not divorce. Not divorce, and two people can't, whatever. Here we go.
But there's always one or both that are responsible. And Jesus said that here we have an innocent victim, the woman, who needed some legal protection. The Greek word apoluo is translated divorce, actually means to relinquish a legal right. So the reason Moses allowed the divorce is because if the husband was not going to take care of her, he should let go of his right to her. Now, when I say right, I'm not talking like she's property. This is just the way it was in first century Palestine, time of Christ, and back.
Yes. No, it's that way today. The right. You have right over each other's body from 1 Corinthians, okay? Her body belongs to him. His body belongs to her. That's the right. And it still exists today. It's not this old stuff.
Earlier to Moses. This allowed another man to marry her and to provide for her. That was the way it was back then. Jesus showed that a divorce was allowed by Moses not to be part of God's original plan, but because of the stubbornness of the spouse who wasn't taking care of his other spouse or his spouse. So he's basically saying that divorce is only tolerated because of man's stubbornness and sin. So what Jesus is saying here,
man is still stubborn and sinful today, but divorce is not tolerated. It's not allowed. Only separation with the bond remaining is allowed. That's it. You got one spouse for life. That's the dang deal, okay? But they've had to reinvent and rewrite this history because of what he just said. Moses allowed it, and because of the hardness of heart and stuff, and to protect the innocent, and now we're just going to keep on doing the same thing. But they have to do that because they got to accommodate the annulments, which exploded because marriage became love, because Dietrich von Hildebrand got the ball rolling, and Pius XII said, legalize it. Then John Paul II said, and I will advertise it. That's what happened with NFP.
here is it wasn't God's plan to have it this way, but because one spouse isn't taking care of the other, Moses allowed it. And this is what the church is kind of getting involved in here. Do you know divorce? Let's talk about divorce for a little bit. Do you know the divorce rate in the United States is over 50% now? And do you know the Catholic rate of divorce is actually about the same as everyone else? We should reflect on that. I do want to tell you.
It didn't used to be that way, but the way it is, the reason is because Catholics can walk out of marriage guilt-free all day long and get a new spouse, no problem. You just claim abuse. You divorce on your own authority because Father Alar said it's okay, particularly if you think your marriage is invalid. Father Alar encourages you to split. That's what he says. If you think your marriage is invalid, you need to split, okay? The kids will be, I don't know, freaking heck. He's anti-marriage. Then you're all but guaranteed the annulment. You can see the statistics. Many dioceses, 100% annulment granted. That's why.
An interesting story that I came across in doing my research that one of my employees sent to me. He said, Father Chris, you might want to mention this in your talk tomorrow. So I was doing my research and I found it fascinating. Let's pull up our next slide. This little town, I'm Croatian, and this is a town of
This is totally boring. Everyone's heard this a zillion times. These guys, there's no divorce, and that's because they say marriage is the cross, so it's in their culture, okay?
The beautiful church there.
But
we can't. They've never had a divorce. It's actually documented. It's the only divorce-free town in the world.
It's total culture, and that's good. But then they say marriage is.
Wedding ceremony. I think this is fascinating.
The culture is saying you got to stick with it.
Presented to him by the bride and the groom.
But
so
ain't going to work for the rest of the world.
He places the bride's right hand upon the crucifix, the priest, then that of the groom's hand over her hand, and covers both their hands with a stole. Then the couple makes their vows with their hands clasping the crucifix. Now listen to this. This is really interesting. The priest then tells them that they have found their ideal partner. Now it's not all sun and joy here. Listen to this. They have found their ideal partner with whom they must share their lives with the following words.
It's cool and all,
you know, but your cross.
This is not the problem.
It is a cross that you must bear,
and
love,
it's
and take with
basically
you
a United
every
States
day
problem.
of your life. Know how to appreciate you, or excuse me, to appreciate it.
As you know,
because your cross will get you to
6% of the world's Catholics.
Remember, I just said one of the three objectives of marriage is to get your spouse to heaven. They then kiss it and put it up in their home, showing their belief that a family must be born of the cross. Very interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But Father, you're still not covering the fact that I've tried everything, and it's just not working. All right, we're getting there. But the first thing I have to cover, though, is what about divorce? Is divorce a sin? Let's go to our next slide.
Yes.
So, is divorce itself a sin? Many say that divorce is not the sin. Father, it's marriage with remarriage without an annulment. And in one sense, that is very true. My sister is a perfect example. I'll tell you a little bit more about her in a minute. So, is divorce itself a sin? Well, maybe, but not.
Okay. Is running your spouse over with a steamroller a sin? Maybe. If it's the only possible way to protect the children and protect certain rights, if it's only possible way to run them over with a steamroller, then it does not constitute a moral offense. But it's basically never the only possible way. And it's the same with divorce. Divorce is never the only possible way in the United States for anybody to protect those rights. Never. You can always do legal separation or equivalent.
Necessarily. What do I mean by that? Catechism 2384 says divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. Please don't beat me up here.
Whatever, dude.
I'm reading directly from the catechism.
No, you're not. I'm going to show it you're not.
Divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. It does injury to the covenant of salvation.
Divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. It does injury to the covenant of salvation. All right. Then let's check this out. Hopefully you can still hear me. I'm going to go like this just in case you can't hear me. 2384, that's what he read, okay? Divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. Then he totally skips this part. And I don't think he's doing it by accident, man. It claims to break the contract to which the spouses freely consented to live together till death. He never says that. He goes right over it because he said marriage is a covenant, and if it's a contract, that means rights, that means objective definition. So the catechism tries to be Catholic, sorta, but then you can kind of still wiggle out of this if you just go with the CCC. But anyway, that's disingenuous, I guess. I don't know why he skips this. I don't think he's that dumb. I don't know. But he doesn't really answer questions from what I can tell. Now, let's go back. See, we'll keep going here. Okay, ready? Hit it.
The church says that divorce can add to the gravity of an existing rupture because like children are affected and things like that.
Wait, the church says divorce can add what? Wait a minute. That's not right. Listen.
Says divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. Please don't beat me up here. I'm reading directly from the catechism.
Yeah.
Divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. It does injury to the covenant of salvation.
Breaks the contract.
The church says that divorce can add to the gravity of an existing rupture because like children are affected.
Is that what it says? Divorce can add to the gravity of an existing rupture? Divorce does injury to the covenant of salvation. Contracting a new union adds gravity. That's what he said. That's what it says. He messed that part up. Hang on.
And things like that. 2385 in the Catechism says divorce is immoral also because it introduces disorder into the family and into society. This disorder brings grave harm to the deserted spouse, to children traumatized by the separation of their parents, and because of its contagious effect, which makes it truly a plague on society. Wow, that's harsh.
It's not harsh. Someone's got to stand up for the kids, the family. What's harsh is what goes on with the kids. You wreck them for life. You take their foundation away. They can't trust God or their parents, and they're alienated. And that's harsh, my man, okay? Not these teaching.
Those are some pretty strong words. But that's the catechism of the Catholic Church. That is not me. That's not my opinion, okay? But let's qualify this. If you just read that by itself and you are unfortunately a victim of divorce, you might really be feeling bad right now. I don't want you to. I want you to keep listening, okay? Now, this is harsh, yes. But Jesus says in verse 9 that God has joined, what God has joined, let no man put asunder. So based on that verse plus the catechism passage I just read, we can come to the conclusion that divorce really may be sinful in and of itself.
It is sinful in itself.
However, I emphasize, however, one spouse may be innocent.
As we covered, there's always a guilty spouse in a divorce, and there's always an innocent spouse. Otherwise, there's no reason for the divorce. Or, if there's no reason for the divorce, then the guilty spouse is the one who did it.
Maybe you are completely innocent. They tried to save everything, but were abandoned.
Maybe you're completely innocent. All right, every human being commits sin. No spouse is completely innocent of sin or keeping Ephesians 5 perfectly or whatever. Everyone fails or comes short of the mark, okay? So every spouse is guilty of something. But the separation of spouses, only one spouse is guilty and one spouse is innocent.
In those cases, there is no sin. Let's talk about this. Next slide. Paragraph 2686. Let's read this.
2386.
It can happen that One of the spouses, now this also comes from the Catechism.
Duh.
It can happen that one of the spouses is the innocent victim of a divorce decreed by civil law.
So check this out. Look, it says it can happen that one of the spouses is the innocent victim. It can also happen that one of the spouses is the guilty victimizer. Those are your two options. You got an innocent victim and a guilty victimizer. Those are the only things that can happen. Think about it. If both parties are innocent, then no one's divorcing. If both parties are guilty of divorce, then the only way that could exist is if both parties file and you have a joint divorce, okay? Co-filing, and that's like never happens, almost never happens. It's the only way that both people can be guilty is if both are filing together. We both want to go to hell together, so we're both going to divorce together. That's the only way you can get that. But I think 99.9% of the divorces are not joint filing. It's one against the other. So whoever files is guilty until proven innocent.
This spouse, therefore, has not, I emphasize, has not contravened the moral law. That means you have not sinned.
Okay, if can have one of the spouses is the innocent victim of a divorce decreed by civil law. That he's saying this person is innocent. In other words, if you're on the receiving end of the divorce, you are innocent until proven guilty by the bishop. He's the only one who can do it, and the promoter of justice. Okay, these guys, Father Alar is not going there, and he won't. They can't because it comes back to marriage is law. NFP can't be accepted. And we can't say that, so we're not going to go there. That's what's going on. We're going to sacrifice marriage to the God of NFP. That's what they're doing.
There is a considerable difference between a spouse who has sincerely tried to be faithful to the sacrament of marriage and is unjustly abandoned, and the one who through his own grave fault destroys a canonically valid marriage.
Okay, unjustly abandoned. That means marriage is based in justice, not love. Justice means, obviously, that there's rights, okay? Yes, there's a difference between someone who's tried to be faithful and the one who's unjustly abandoned. That's right. The CCC is trying to use wordsmithing to make it seem like there's no one's really for sure guilty. But in other words, they're saying if it's really obvious, Whoever takes the law into their own hands and takes one's bodily rights and removes them without due process is guilty. That's why you have to have the bishop's permission to approach the civil forum or grave sin. But they don't talk that way anymore because marriage is love. This is why the catechism is squishy and people can just work around it. I'm talking too much. Sorry.
Wow. I think that's important. You know, my sister, I use as an example. God bless my sister. For 24 years, she was a faithful wife, and her husband, after 24 years of marriage, abandoned her for another woman. After he abandoned her for another woman, my sister said, "Oh my gosh, I am guilty of the sin of divorce."
Why did his sister say, once the husband abandoned, that she's guilty of the sin of divorce? I wonder why she said that. It's because she filed. Otherwise, she wouldn't say that. Nobody has a husband who bails on them with another chick, and then the husband files for divorce, and then the wife say, "I'm guilty of the sin of divorce." It's got to be, by the way, it's 80% the female who files anyway, so among college graduates, it's higher or something. Anyway, it sounds like Father Alar, I've been asking this question, but I haven't got an answer yet. It sounds like the wife, his sister, I forgot his name. I remember, I forgot right now. Anyway, his sister files for divorce, and then they talk about how the sister does not go to communion because she divorced, and that's exactly right. You do not go to communion if you file for divorce because you have to make public restitution. You can't just go to confession. You have to get a separation decree publicly, or you got to get permission to divorce, okay? But because legal separation is available, no divorce is allowed. And in this way, when the husband figures out that fooling around isn't going to be a good idea, and she's still waiting, holding the bag, then he can come back. But if she blows it all up with a divorce and wrecks everything, and then frickin' gets the annulment, dude, the door is so shut that the husband's going to be like, screw all you Catholics. I know I'm guilty, but the heck with this. I'm going to let God sort it out. That's the problem. It's bad.
No, you're not.
Yeah, you are.
I love my sister.
Okay, then tell her the
There's
truth.
no way God could hold my sister accountable
Really?
for that divorce.
Why not? Anyone who divorces or takes their marriage to the public forum, the civil forum, without ecclesiastical permission incurs grave sin. That's the facts. It don't change. You cannot say separation is a mere a church. You cannot say separation of spouses belongs to church governance one day and state governance the next day, because it's not a merely civil effect. You can't change the nature of marriage with a stroke of a pen. You cannot abrogate "let not man put asunder."
She was traumatized, she was victimized, and she was put through, let's face it, hell. I'm sorry.
Fine. I'm doing the abortion because I'm traumatized, victimized, and put through hell, or I will be put through hell, so I'm going to do the abortion. It's the same thing. You can't do what's intrinsically evil no matter what's going on. And separating on your own authority is intrinsic evil because you're letting man put asunder. So the state is man. They can't do that. They cannot publicly and by the force of the state do that unless you have ecclesiastical judgment if you're Catholic. So your sister was right to not go to communion. She's got to make public restitution. Has to. Just like the kids remain legitimate after an annulment, your sister's sin of divorce remains legitimate after an annulment because it was all putative.
And we've both forgiven him. We pray for him. But that doesn't mean she has to carry the burden of guilt.
Oh, brother. You've got to be true. You have to pursue truth. The burden of guilt? No, she doesn't have to carry the burden of guilt. She can make public restitution. You do that through you get a separation decree. That's what you do, because if all this abuse and all this crazy is going on, you instead of having an annulment trial, you have a separation trial. That's what it's right in canon law 1153, 1692 through 1696. Separation with the bond remaining. No divorce. Separation with the bond remaining. If you do divorce, if you use the state to separate without the church approving the plan, grave sin. Guilt. You incur the guilt of grave sin. That's the Third Council of Baltimore Decree 126. Like I said, I'm not going to be going to all these sources. You can ask me for them in the comments. No problem, but it's going to take too long if I keep flipping back and forth to sources.
She's an innocent victim.
She may be innocent and is pure as the wind-driven snow, but she's publicly guilty if she filed for divorce. She's publicly guilty until proven innocent. Even though Father Alar may say she's innocent, that's not the public authority. The bishop is, and he hasn't said anything. Has he? I don't think so. No. Because there's never, unless there's been a separation decree, but something tells me he would have mentioned it.
All right. So when is divorce allowed? The answer is when we have an innocent victim. Let's read the next slide.
When is divorce allowed? The answer is when we have an innocent victim. No. Separation of spouses is allowed when there's adultery or life becomes unduly difficult to live with them. You can have separation with the bond remaining, and there must be due process. You cannot dispense with due process. Otherwise, there's no justice. What if I come over to your house and say, I just decided that all your belongings in the house belong to me, and if you have a problem with that, I think you can go pray about it, and bring the sheriff over and we just take all your stuff. Okay? No, there must be due process. If I say it's mine, I have to prove it through a court, all right?
Paragraph 2383 of the Catechism.
This is the part I was talking about with the
If
steamroller.
civil divorce remains the only possible way of ensuring certain legal rights, the care of children, or the protection of an inheritance, it can be tolerated and does not constitute a moral offense.
Notice he doesn't put CCC 2384 on the screen because that's the part he didn't read. He airbrushed it out. However, this is the Catholic loophole right here, and it's bad. And I'm going to explain why it's wrong. If civil divorce remains the only possible way of basically taking care of your kids or whatever, then it doesn't tolerate a legal offense. Boom, I'm in. I'm getting my divorce. Everything's groovy. And the priest said so. It's fine. Okay. Civil divorce in the USA today is never the only possible way. Someone tell Lila Miller that, please. Layla Miller, it's never the only possible way, ever. All divorce is immoral because it's never the only possible way. All 50 states have legal separation or equivalent. You need child support. You need a restraining order. You need legal separation. You got it. All it does is you're still married on the books, but everything else is separate. So this protects marriage, and it facilitates reconciliation, which is the mind of the church. This other junk facilitates serial monogamy and rose sweet type stuff. Okay, like I said, is killing wrong? Well, it depends. If it's in self-defense, it's not. So, like, if shooting your neighbor remains the only possible way of saving your life, then it doesn't tolerate a civil offense. Well, fine. It says I can do it, so I have judged for myself that I can go shoot my neighbor. Boom, boom, boom. Or, like I said, I could go run my spouse over with a steamroller because it says in 2383, if running your spouse over with a steamroller is the only possible way of ensuring certain legal rights, then it doesn't constitute a moral offense. There are other ways to ensure these rights besides gunshots and steamrollers. And in this case, there's other ways to preserve the right. It's called separation with bond remaining and civil legal, what do you call it? Legal separation. So okay, let's keep going.
Okay. Now, guess what I found in canon law last night?
What?
Canon number 1153, paragraph 1. Listen to this. If either of the spouses causes grave mental or psychological danger to the other spouse or to the offspring, or otherwise renders common life too difficult, that spouse gives the other a legitimate cause for leaving.
I don't think so.
Now, personally, I think if you read further in canon law, it's talking about a separation.
Yeah.
The church does teach that you should first get permission from the bishop for a separation.
Hold on.
And then try to pray that things cause for leaving. Now, personally, I think if you read further in canon law, it's talking about a separation. The church does teach that you should first get permission from the bishop for a separation.
You should first get permission from the bishop. No, you must. There is no should, and that's because let not man put asunder. The bishop is in the person of Christ, okay, because he's the bishop. So you do things through the bishop. It's not I should. It's a nice idea. You should get an abortion, but if in certain grave circumstances you can, no. It's not you shouldn't get an abortion. You can't. And you should have guilt if you do have one. That's why they have Project Rachel, and you admit, okay.
And then try to pray that things will work out. So now if we have these types of situations, this begs the next question. Can I receive Holy Communion after a divorce?
No, because divorce is never the only possible way. Therefore, hang on. Is he going? Oh, shoot. I ended up going. I forwarded all the way to the beginning. That's terrible. I completely messed this up. I'm going to push pause and find out where we were. Sorry. I'll probably take a bio break.
Can I receive Holy Communion after a divorce? If divorce is not necessarily a sin, as I just read, we do know that marriage without an annulment is.
Yes. Okay. It's called public adultery, but divorce without the bishop's permission is public abandonment. So both of those are sins against marriage, adultery and abandonment. Without, like I said, if you separate without the bishop, it's public adultery. I don't have the authority to grant separations. Father Alar doesn't. Your aunt so-and-so doesn't. Only the bishop can grant authority. Otherwise, it's public adultery. Let not man put asunder. And Father Alar is saying, no. Man can put asunder on your own authority. There's your problem right there.
So there's more on that coming up. But indeed, innocent divorced people can receive Holy Communion.
Innocent divorced people? What's a divorced person? I guess he's saying someone who is on either side of the divorce that's innocent. Okay. But in basically all cases, both parties say we're innocent. So who is?
Cannot are those who are remarried without an annulment. You know, my sister, I'm going to go back to her. God bless her. Do you know that I found out after her divorce that my sister wasn't receiving Holy Communion?
That's because she's normal, and you probably have good parents, and she realized she committed a sin. Okay? She had the sensus fidelium there, okay? I'd like to talk to the sister.
She said, well, the church teaches I'm divorced. I can't receive Holy Communion. I went, oh.
The church teaches I'm divorced? No, I doubt she said that. She probably said the church teaches divorce is a sin, and I'm the one who filed, therefore I'm not going to communion. That's the thing. But now what's really tough is they probably told the girl, you don't need to get public restitution. You can just they say divorce is bad, but it's not always. They don't tell you what's going on. It's like having Project Rachel that's saying abortion isn't always wrong, and abortion isn't always killing your baby. Sometimes you have to, and we just all try to get through it, and it's not cool.
Pam, God bless you. Your heart is so
I did
big.
look up Pam Alar. I can't find her.
But you can go to Holy Communion. She's like, what? No, the church says I'm divorced. I can't go to Holy Communion. No, Pam, you're the victim. You can go.
Pam, if you filed, and it sure as heck sounds like you did, you're not the victim. You're the victimizer publicly. I don't care if you're Mother Teresa. You're the victimizer if your name is on it and you filed and you used the state to break the contract using state guns. They take the guns and they say, anyone doesn't do our contract, we're going to put you in jail. The new contract. So they took God's contract, which you signed up for, and you gave it to the state. And they say, guess what? New contract for you two. You got to pay so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. You get the kids here. That's our new contract. You violate that, forget sin, you're going to jail. Okay?
Go to Holy Communion. You were not the cause of that divorce. Now her
if she filed, she's the cause.
ex-spouse, although
Ex-spouse?
he caused because he caused the divorce, now he
See, listen, I think Father Alar is maybe a little smarter than he lets on or whatever. He said because he caused the divorce, look, bro, he's basically admitting my sister filed. That's what he's saying.
probably shouldn't go to Holy Communion.
Probably shouldn't go. The dude is publicly innocent. Pam, the sister, cannot go. She is not eligible because she filed without the bishop. The Tasmanian devil, crazy. What do you call him? Who's the Helter Skelter guy? Charles Manson, husband. You know that guy. He should go to communion, or he's eligible to. Whether he should or not is another story. He is eligible because he has done no manifest sin. Canon 9:15. Pam did the manifest sin, because it sounds like she's the one who filed. Whoever filed does the manifest sin. Canon 9:15. If they persist in that, no communion.
Until he's been to confession and he's tried to reconcile back to the church.
No, until he's gone to confession and he's tried to reconcile with the spouse, okay? But he's not didn't do anything if he didn't file. Pam needs to not only reconcile with God, she needs to reconcile in order to do that with the husband. And if she can't do that, she has to get a public declaration of separation from the ecclesiastical judge, not the friggin' state. She can't follow her conscience on this because marriage is public.
You see the difference here? All right.
There, I
Both
feel better.
parties may be guilty of the sin of divorce, or maybe only one, but usually someone is. So canon law, as I said,
went
says
through that.
best to probably get permission
One
to
victim, one
separate
victimizer.
first.
Well, wait,
Now,
he said
the
something
Catechism
important.
does say that
Hold
if
on a
that
second.
spouse, although because he caused the divorce, now he probably shouldn't go to Holy Communion until he's been to confession and he's tried to reconcile back to the church. You see the difference here? All right. Both parties may be guilty of the sin of divorce, or maybe only one.
Only one is.
But usually someone is.
Every
So
time somebody
canon law,
is.
as I said, says best to probably get permission to separate first.
Best. Oh, did you
Now,
hear? Oh, shut up. No, sorry. It's best to probably. It's no best to probably. You have to do due process. You have to get permission from the bishop. Otherwise, you are violating let no man put asunder. Or as they say these days, let no human being put asunder. Thank you, Stanford Nutting.
The Catechism does say that if that doesn't work, then divorce.
The Catechism says if the separation doesn't work, then divorce. He's totally pulling that out of his hat. It doesn't say that. If the separation doesn't lead to reconciliation, you maintain the separation and that's it. And it's done through the bishop's governance. I don't get to say, I'm separating and my spouse isn't getting a grip and giving me unity like I want or whatever. Therefore, boom, I get to divorce because Father Alar said, cool. Wrong. Jesus said no divorce, but you can put away your spouse for if they're doing something bad, really bad, you can put them away. Put away is not divorce. But if you read the New American Bible and all that those other translations, they just say divorce all the time and they don't even say put away. Go to the Douay Rheims, even King James, whatever. Put away is separation with the bond remaining, and divorce is Old Testament only.
Would be allowed, but only for protection, like legal rights, or I think in extreme abuse cases, things like that. Now, some people point out, what about unchastity, Father? Doesn't in one of the scripture passages Jesus say,
It's gonna
or
be
the
too
case
long.
of
Well,
unchastity?
we're here now.
People
Let's
always
keep
take
going.
that to mean my space was unfaithful. Actually, unchastity means an invalid marriage, not adultery.
No, unchastity does not mean invalid marriage. It says it right in the Douay Rheims. It means fornication, which means your spouse cheats on you, then you can separate, okay? His interpretation that he's saying right now was never said by anybody until Vatican II. They have to rewrite Scripture or reinterpret it to get annulments out of the thing. Let's keep going.
And so an invalid marriage is this whole thing we've been talking about, those 6 conditions that I said that make a marriage valid that I just put up on the slide about 10 minutes ago. In this case, these people should split anyway because they weren't validly married to begin with.
Did you hear that? In this case, these people should split anyway because they weren't validly married to begin with. There's his anti-marriage statement right there if I ever heard one. Because the church does say, even in cases of suspected invalidity, the separation of spouses is not merely a civil fact. You cannot separate on your own authority. He just said, he's basically saying, if you aren't feeling the love, if Tina Turner is getting going on you or whatever, get an annulment and be sure to separate. This guy. Sorry. Father
All right,
Alar.
now, let's get into the tricky parts. What if you don't feel the love for the person anymore? Is that a valid reason for divorce? Let's say everything else, there's no major abuse or problems, but you just don't feel in love anymore. Is that a valid reason? Actually, please don't beat me up. Actually, the church says no. Wow, Father, that's hard. Well, as I said in my promo video, love is not just an emotion the church teaches. Thomas Aquinas tells us that love is an act of the will. I choose to love you. Emotions go up and down. If we were to end every relationship when our emotions went down, I'd never talk to my parents again. If I was to go on every time an emotion went up or down and then when it hit the down, I would never talk to my best friend again. Because you're going to have those pitfalls. They're going to go through, especially in the pandemic, like a seismograph. But remember, the choice
that
to
song in
love
my
your
head.
spouse, to will their good, is your responsibility. To death do you part.
Okay, to will their good is your responsibility till death do you part. That's correct, but that's not the contract. It's bodily rights till death. That's the contract. You can't violate that. But as far as willing their good, you do your best. That's God's going to judge you. But the rights contract, that's judged by the bishop. The law, okay? You got to go to court. Otherwise, marriage is lawless, and that's what we have now. If you start making love the essence, marriage is lawless. Divorce is not a sin. Annulment on demand. Marriage is dead. That's what's up.
That's where sometimes it gets hard. I realize that. But even if your feelings change, and even if you can't live with them, you can still pray for them and have that act of the will for their good. All right? Jesus teaches discipleship is not to include concessions for sinfulness, like I want to go with someone else. Just the fact that you want to go with someone else doesn't give us the right to do that. I know it's hard. We may feel that way. Jesus shows marriage is between a man and a woman for life. These aren't my words. It's the gospel. And Genesis, the book of Genesis even says that. So the ideal is to focus on the beauty of marriage rather than only on divorce here. Jesus, now, one of the things he did is he restored to its original purity the dignity of man and woman in marriage. This is what Jesus did, instituted by God at the beginning of time, the beginning of creation. Therefore, divorce is excluded and remarriages become adultery, Jesus said, unless it's unlawful. This is the one thing that we have to get in mind. I'm going to show that in a minute. But Father, again, what do I do?
I forgot what he just said, but he just said more of this crazy unlawful stuff. No, that's Protestant, or that's New Catholic, I guess you could say. Except for fornication, you can't put away your spouse. You cannot separate except for fornication. Because Canon 1060 says all marriages are valid until proven otherwise, you can't separate if you think the marriage is invalid. You have to have due process to separate. So thoughts of invalidity can never justify separation. But Father Alar here said you should split if you're thinking your marriage is invalid and you have tried to separate. And nope, it doesn't make any sense. By the way, if you start saying that the Matthew 19:9, the separation clause is for validity, then that means there's no biblical basis for separation with the bond remaining. You can only separate if you think your marriage is invalid, but you can't separate for adultery. It's crazy, which is why, by the way, anyone wants to debate me on this or talk, will come on the channel and we'll talk about it. Go ahead. You let me know. We can do it. Father Alar won't. They can't back the stuff up. There's too many loose ends. We just have to say a bunch of stuff, and everyone's like, give me NFP and give me annulments, and I'll be happy. And that's what they keep doing. Can you tell he's kind of talking? He's like dumbs down his talk.
This marriage can't go on. Okay. Again, the church gets that, and maybe you actually have a non-valid marriage. Maybe your marriage never really did exist in the first place. Now,
if you knew what permanence was, and you knew what exclusivity was, and you knew where babies came from, and you had the capacity to make the babies, it's valid. You're married in the church. That's it. That's all you need capacity for. Sorry.
We pray that's not the case. You should always pray that marriage works. Every marriage is assumed to be valid unless...
Whether it works or not has zero to do with validity, whatever working means. Okay, like we're getting along or something. No. This is why marriage is dead, because there's no contract anymore. It's just if it works. So you try it. It's a boyfriend-girlfriend thing. It might work. It might not.
The annulment process, the decree of nullity, proves it otherwise. So let's talk about this. Father, let's look at our next slide. Am I able to get an annulment? Again, I'm using the word annulment synonymous with decree of nullity, which is a more proper term. All right. But here is what we have to ask ourselves. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Jesus said, I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, here's the key words. These are the words of Jesus. Unless the marriage is unlawful.
If you go to the Douay Rheims, whoever divorces his wife except for fornication. So if they cheat. Whoever divorces his wife. By the way, It's whoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery. Okay, because there is no divorce. If you go to the Douay Rheims, I can tell. It already says it. Whoever puts away his wife, except for the cause of fornication, and marries another commits adultery, which makes sense. So if you bail on your spouse because they do something wrong, except for fornication, then you marry another, you commit adultery. But if you bail on them, you're allowed to separate, but still, even if you're still going to commit adultery, even no matter what the cause was. Anyway, when you see the word divorce, you got to go back to the Douay Rheims. I'm trying to point at it. You can't really see me pointing at it. You got to go back to the Douay Rheims because it's put away.
And marries another commits adultery. That's Matthew 5:32. So this is the key word. What does unlawful mean? It means that the marriage didn't follow the legal requirements, church legal now, not civil legal.
Okay, it's obvious he's wrong. Like I said, Canon 1060. Every marriage is valid until proven otherwise. So what they're saying is like, you can go kill your neighbor and then have a trial later to prove that you're innocent. No. Or I can take my neighbor's car and then go to trial later and prove I'm innocent. Meanwhile, I can drive. No. If you're going to take your neighbor's car, you have to prove it's yours first before you take it. So he's saying, I can leave my spouse, then prove they weren't my spouse. Canon 1060, you're violating that. It's so stupid. But everyone buys it because they just got to have what they want.
For a valid marriage. Here's the important thing. Remember, an annulment is not a Catholic divorce.
It is in practice, but not in theory. It is a Catholic divorce because you just walk out of your marriage and you say, it wasn't really a marriage. It's like if you get a mortgage. That's not really truly a mortgage because I didn't feel like my house was a home. So I'm just walking out. I'll take the house too, by the way, because it wasn't really truly a truly legal mortgage. It wasn't really a mortgage. It was just kind of a mortgage, but not really.
There is no such thing, but rather an official statement that at least one of the requirements that I put up on the screen, those 6 things, for a valid sacramental marriage were not present at the time of the marriage. So if you remember those 6 things, somebody's not open to life. You got married and that person never agreed to be open to life. That's one of the conditions for marriage missing. Somebody doesn't have the psychological or physical capacity to engage in the union.
You don't have the psychological capacity to engage in the union. What a pile of goo. You can't define marriage talking about you need psychological capacity to participate in the union. Capacity for what? What union? What is it? No, you just got to make babies. That's it. That's why marriage existed for so long until the Beatles. Love is all you need. All law goes out the window. That he's saying it right here. He doesn't even know it.
Like the marital act, impotency. That's a grounds that the marriage was never valid. There was not free consent. You held a shotgun to the spouse.
They go through all these basic things. Yeah, you can't get married if you're super, super drunk, or you can't get married if you get married at the top of the Eiffel Tower. If you're Catholic, No one's doing that. Everyone is saying, I didn't like it. I want out. And they're like, cool. Someone couldn't participate in the union. You must have been driven nuts. Your divorce is fine. Your annulment is on demand. That's what's going on.
That you're not married to, and she's scared to death and says, yes, okay, I'll marry you. That's not a valid marriage. If any of those things existed, and there were 6 of them I listed, then you may not have a valid marriage. It wasn't present at the time of the wedding. Something that should have been present wasn't. So a valid Catholic sacramental marriage can be dissolved if one of those requirements is not present, even if the civil government says you are divorced. So if they are all present, you can't separate. It can't be dissolved. If all of those things that I listed on those
with permission, but you can't get
number
rid of
6
marriage.
things, If they're all present, the marriage can't be dissolved. Jesus says, unless it's unlawful. That means if one of those 6 things I listed are not present.
Jesus says you can separate for porneia, fornication. You can separate. But you can never declare, you can't separate because you think your marriage is invalid. The church, it's in the acta, you can't do it. Only no private authority can do this. Father, this is like, it's like Protestants. They're like, nothing existed before Martin Luther. Father Alar is basically kind of like nothing existed before Vatican II as far as marriage law.
Then it's not lawful. And that means there wasn't a valid marriage to begin with. Now, remember, what were those 6 things? Just to refresh your memory for the sacrament or the sacramental marriage, that you got married within the church if you were baptized Catholic, all right? Or you married another baptized Christian, that you freely consented, right? That you understood what marriage is, that you were open to life, that you had the intent to be faithful from the beginning, that you had the psychological and physical ability to carry out the duties of marriage. Like
I said, that's the loophole they drive the truck through right there. That's the Canon 1095 loose canon. You needed psychological capacity to enter the union and the equal partnership and all this baloney that is a made-up definition of marriage that did not exist before we started calling it a love compact in Gaudium at Spes 48.
the marital act. If any one of these are missing, you may have grounds for an annulment. This is important. Now, an annulment or decree of nullity, again, acknowledges that until the annulment is given, marriage is assumed to be valid. That's why any children that come from your union are not illegitimate. All marriages are marriages that are assumed to be valid. Until the decree comes that this marriage is invalid, it is assumed that it is
Just
valid.
like
So your
Pam's
children who were born before the annulment
is
were
still
born under the idea that this marriage
valid,
is valid. And they are not
Pam's
illegitimate.
divorce
So the big
stint still
misconceptions.
exists.
Now, do you know this is interesting? 94% of petitions for annulments in the U.S. are granted. 94%.
Probably more than that, dude.
John Paul actually called it into question. He thought it actually was way too many. Do you know the United States that we only have 6% of the world's Catholics? Right? There's in the world, there's 1 billion Catholics. And there's 60 million
We're getting
Catholics in
there,
the United
y'all.
States.
We're getting there.
Right? We're about
Hang in
25% of
there.
the population. We're the main religion in the United States. There's 350 million. So
Divorce
we're about
nerds
60 million
unite.
Catholics. That means 60 million out of 1 billion. We're 6%
Yeah,
of the Catholics. But do you know that we account for
everyone's heard this, I
70% of the annulments worldwide? So only 6% of the Catholics in the U.S. get 70% of the annulments. I thought that was interesting. Do you know in
it's a
just few
super
years
big
ago,
scandal.
I haven't gotten updated.
It's because Americans go get it done. They did take it's like communion in the hand. They took the loophole. By the way, the annulment revolution started kind of in the Netherlands and stuff, and they were doing this New Spirit of Vatican II definition of marriage. I think it was before Cardinal Burke, like in the 70s, the head of the Signatura. I forgot his name right now. I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, the head of the Signatura way back. He's told those guys, knock it off. You cannot define marriage this way. This is all wrong. Forget it. And they just said, yeah, whatever. And they took it to Canada and they took it to the USA, and it just exploded. They just said, we don't care at Rome, saying we're just going to do this. And that's what I wish I could remember his name. But you can ask me later about that. All right, let's go.
Numbers, but back in 2006, in the U.S., there were 27,000 marriages that were declared null. Do you know how many there were in 1968? 338.
Okay, yeah. It's the law. Okay, if you have a wide open southern border, you're changing the law. You know how many people are going to come in? A zillion. If you totally lock up the border, how many people are going to come in? Barely any, okay? It's the law. You can't say, well, the reason why everyone's coming over the southern border today is because the people have just bad character. We need to educate them on what true citizenship is and how to be good and everything. No. Change the law, the behavior changes. That's what's going on. Once you start saying Tina Turner is right, love's got stuff to do with it, you know, that's what marriage is. Now you've trashed the law and the annulments explode. That is the reason you put love in the essence. That's the cause of the annulment revolution. The reason why that is super unpopular and no one will say it is because you have to get rid of your NFP if you want to get rid of annulments. The two go hand in hand and they cannot be separated.
Wow. Let's pray.
Wow.
Let's pray for our families. our marriages. So that's why I want to go to the next slide. A declaration of nullity, or what I've been calling an annulment, is not the dissolving of an existing marriage, but rather a determination that consent was never given by either spouse.
If you change the terms of consent, you can make anything annul. Let's say you buy a house. Like I said, you change the terms of signing on a mortgage. You change the definition of mortgage to one where you got to feel it, then boom, you can get out of your mortgage anytime. Or you change the definition of a motor vehicle to you've got to really feel the love of your car, or it's not really your car. You can get out of car ownership anytime. Just change the definition of consent. You change the essence of the thing consented to, and boom, you can change the whole thing.
Spouse, and thus a marriage never existed. Consent can be lacking due to different factors that I just read to you, like you're trying to marry somebody to gain citizenship, or it's a shotgun wedding, but it also can be deceit. If you married somebody that totally lied to you, that they were a totally different person, they were living a double life. Like we hear these spouses all the time that, Father, oh my gosh, I found out that my husband was living a completely double life. He was, procuring homosexual prostitutes and had this other family and was doing
None
all
of
this.
this matters. It's all about the love thing in Canon
consent
1095, 2 and 3.
It's actually grounds.
That's what everyone
for
uses,
non-sacramental
Canon
marriage, and therefore
1095,
annulment
2
or
and
decree
3.
nullity. Even if you don't plan to remarry. Now this is interesting. This came to me, realization, talking to an employee yesterday, and I confirmed it with our provincial. My sister who got the divorce, she never went to get the annulment because she said, well, I'm not going to remarry. I'm not going to get an annulment because I don't plan on remarrying ever. I don't need an annulment. And at first, here I'm the priest. And at first I said, well, yeah, you're right. But it took an employee to point out to me, and then I confirmed it with my superior, that there's actually more to it. You probably might want to pray on maybe getting that annulment anyway, even if you don't plan on remarrying. Why? Because it frees you from that spiritual bond that still exists between you and that person, because it's never.
You don't want to free.
So thank
oh,
you,
shoot,
everybody.
I messed it up again. Hang on a second. You don't want to free yourself from the spiritual bond because that is your ticket to heaven. You've got to get your spouse to heaven. So if you divorce and then you get the annulment, now you have totally cut off your ticket to heaven pretty much. It's like, that's not my spouse anymore. Oh, brother, it's bad. That's evil. You have a duty to get your spouse to heaven. It's a package deal. You got to do everything you can. And if you divorce, then cut them off. Brutal. All right, I got to push pause and find out where we stop because I pushed the wrong button.
I'm not going to get an annulment because I don't plan on remarrying ever. I don't need an annulment. And at first, here I'm the priest. And at first I said, well, yeah, you're right. But it took an employee to point out to me, and then I confirmed it with my superior, that there's actually more to it. You probably might want to pray on maybe getting that annulment anyway, even if you don't plan on remarrying. Why? Because it frees you from that spiritual bond that still exists between you and that person, because it's never been declared not a marriage.
The devil wants to free you from that bond, so you stop praying for that person. That's your only hope right there. I mean, so you stop trying to be reconciled, and you start looking everywhere. Once you start getting a new spouse, you're going to like, yeah, bye-bye. I mean, how often do you think of your ex-boyfriend or girlfriend from 30 years ago, or you just like, it's like that. Anyway, the reason why there's pressure to get the annulment, here's the reason. If you're a marriage stander, they're saying you're a walking contradiction to our definition of marriage. Marriage is the manifest love, okay? Because marriage is a love contract. So if we're not seeing the love, if you're living apart and everything, there's no marriage there. And if you insist that you're married while your spouse is AWOL and all this other stuff, you are saying that marriage is not love, and that is violating our Spirit of Vatican II definition. So why don't you be a good little boy and girl and go get your annulment, because you're making us uncomfortable with all this marriage standard stuff. So if that's why the pressure's on to get the annulment. You're a fish out of water today if you stand for your marriage vows when your spouse goes away. And they don't like that.
So in the spiritual realm, you still have that spiritual bond, and that spiritual bond could be helping or hurting you. So you might, if you...
The spiritual bond helps you because marriage is till death. And if you break it, you're saying marriage is not till death. Your salvation depends on your vows. You start getting an annulment, lots of luck. because one day you might second guess that, but it's going to be pretty hard when your original spouse is already, quote, remarried, and now you're married with somebody else, and it's like, whoa, I better not ask too many questions. You know what I mean?
If you really feel it's important to break free, you might want to consider getting that annulment. And you know what
Important
else
to
in the
break
case of my
free?
sister? This is public knowledge, so I'm not revealing anything that's private. But her ex-husband went and married another woman outside the church.
There's no such thing as an ex-husband because marriage is till death. And if you start saying he's an ex-husband, then that means marriage is not till death. Right.
He's living with her. Technically, he's committing the sin of adultery against my sister. Right,
but just so he's saying get the annulment so that the guy isn't doing adultery anymore. He's got to get back to his marriage vows. He's got to get back with his wife, and that's his problem. Just cutting off just saying the marriage doesn't exist doesn't get him to heaven, because he left his wife. Okay, so if you just call them no marriage, then that's not going to work. Because he left his wife. It's putative. Just like the kids do not become illegitimate, the abandonment does not doesn't go away either. The kids remain legitimate. The abandoned sin remains. So you start trying to get I'm talking too much. This is going to take too long. Let's keep going.
Because he's still married to her technically. So I said, I'm going to talk to my sister and say, you might want to consider getting the annulment to actually help free him from that extra sin. Now, it's still fornication. He's still having relations with this woman, not being validly married, but at least you could take out the sin of adultery if you get the annulment. Because fornication is where you have relations between non-married people, but adultery is where you have relations with a married person, and technically, he's still married to my sister. So we might want to consider getting that annulment to free that extra burden. I mean, that would be an act of charity. I'm not saying that you have to, I'm just saying pray on that. Pray on that, very interesting. Even if you don't plan, you may want to get that annulment to loosen the bonds. Now remember, what about this? Father, I can't get an annulment. My ex-spouse will absolutely be furious. Well, actually, technically, your ex-spouse does not have to agree.
I can't get the annulment because my ex-spouse. He is basically admitting that the state controls marriage and that your spouse becomes an ex-spouse when the state says so. That's so retarded. Dude, come on, man. No.
To be part of the annulment process. The annulment process can continue even if your spouse is completely uncooperative. It doesn't matter. It helps, but your ex-spouse does not have to agree with the annulment process. It will still move forward. Now, I've been talking about all the marriages today that are valid. Well, Father, then what do you talk about all these other marriages? Well, all the marriages that are either natural or sacramental are assumed to be between a man and a woman. That's what Christ...
Before doing the annulment, you got to get that separation. You got to have due process justice, okay? Separation justice, which doesn't come through no fault. So if your spouse is going to get all mad if you try the annulment, why don't you try to get some separation justice first? Why don't you do the separation decree, which is a salvation issue? That's what you got to do. And then you'll probably find that there is no grounds for separation in the first place.
It says in the Gospels, that's what Genesis says. So any marriage that is non-monogamous, in other words, polygamy, people with multiple wives, or non-heterosexual marriages, which are not marriages, or non-human spouses, like animals, crazy, I know, but people are marrying dogs and different things. These are not even an invalid marriage. They're not even a marriage at all. This is an invalid attempt at marriage according to the natural law. So no annulment is even needed because there's not even a marriage to declare null. It didn't even reach that point. So this is another important thing. All right. So the two things.
Sorry, this is dragging out. We're going to see if we can buzz through as much of this as we can.
Are consent, meaning you did it willingly. Cool. Capacity, meaning you had the ability, psychological maturity to do it, and that you had proper form.
How much psychological maturity do you need to do it? Not much, my man.
Or you followed the law, meaning you were married in the church. I know this is a lot, and God help us all to understand this, but it does make sense if you think about it. All right, now let's go back and let's go to the next slide. The next slide are what are the impediments to getting married? All right, so these are two full slides. Stay with me. Now, sometimes a person enters into a marriage with full consent that I just said was a requirement, and they had proper form.
Let's
they
see
got
if we can
married
fast
in the
forward.
church.
This is too boring.
It happened in the first place. If you unless you then yes, he can. All right, number 7, impediment of crime. What does that mean? That means that if you brought about the death
too boring.
of your person does it of anything that we can do is love. And I always like to ask my catechism class, hey guys, if you were the only person that ever existed, nobody else ever existed, just you, could there be love? And a community of persons to share love. St. Augustine tells us this. Father, you're making this up.
That's
No, I'm not.
theology of the body
St. Augustine says
stuff.
that in the Trinity we have the perfect love between persons. You have the Father, the lover. You have God the Son, the beloved. And the love between them is so great that from it proceeds
Yeah,
the third
but they're
person.
not married. They didn't
The third
enter a
person,
marriage
the
contract
child.
for bodily rights.
So in that picture, look at the family. Who is the family? Let's pull that slide back up. That family is the mirror. Oh, did we lose it? Okay, we're down. Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't know if we got cut off from our live stream. But the family is the mirror of the Trinity. You have the husband, the lover, the son, the husband, the lover, the wife, the beloved. And the love between them is so great that from it comes a third person, the child. This is what makes our faith so beautiful. All right, now, let's keep going here and I'm going to wrap up. So anyway, this is the Holy Family. With the Holy Family, we see God wanting to live within the human family. This is the revelation of God's will in the Christian married couples. To take it seriously. Remember, Lucia said the final battle between God and Satan will be over marriage in the family. So it's not too late. Put yourself right. Go see your priest. Talk to your priest. Ask him how I can make it right. Do I need my marriage blessed? Do I need it convalidated? Which just means you were married, but it wasn't in the church, and now you want to get right with the church.
final battle
It's
is
called convalidation. Go back. Go to confession. Get an annulment if
marriage
you have
in
to.
the family,
Have these
that's
things done.
right.
A couple
And
can renew their vows
define
at another
it.
church, but you can't get remarried at another church. Just get married in that Catholic church. Remember, go see your priest. He can help you, send you to the bishop. This is why God set it up as a beautiful gift of all Christians, but especially us in our Catholic faith. The beautiful gift of marriage. All right, I want to finish now
Hurry, bro. Yes,
with the most
yes,
famous
yes.
passage that every priest shudders from when he's told this. And I want
Ephesians
to
5,
death
okay.
as Christ loved the church and handed himself over for her. So I want to tackle this because I think it's beautiful. And I know I'm running out of time.
Ephesians 5.
The husband is the head in the marriage, which it just said. For the husband is head of his wife, just as Christ
It's
is
a bunch
head
of baloney.
the church.
He's basically
How
saying,
can there be true equality? All right.
how can there be
The
true
Greek
equality? There is not true equality. And Casti Canubi, I forgot what number it is. I can look it up. Says there's not true equality. The husband is the Lord. He's the head. He has the final say. She is to fear him as far as his authority. In other words, if it comes from the husband, it comes from God. All right? That's what's up. All that is out the window because NFP says marriage is love. Therefore, we need mutual submission and equal partnership and a bunch of other stuff. So Ephesians 5 is blown out, is dead. Okay? You can't have the conjugal rights, you can't have the marital debt, you can't have Ephesians 5 if you have NFP. And what you end up with is a bunch of lawless mush, and you rewrite everything. Okay? Everything after 65, they rewrote all this stuff to accommodate Catholic birth control. That's all.
Word for head is phale, which doesn't
This
mean
is so
boss.
dumb.
It means one who brings fulfillment. And we're getting close here. This is the same word used to describe Christ
fast
as
forward,
head.
it's just too
Paul says
stupid.
husband, this is important, signifies Christ, and the wife signifies the church. So the woman, when it says to subject yourself to your husband, what does it mean? It means submit to husband in his role as Christ. But then the husband, as Christ, has to submit to his role as Christ did to the church, his bride. So the husband submits to his wife like Christ did the church, his bride. Women should submit to like the church to Christ because she is like the church. And men should sacrifice like
authority.
Christ for the church.
He has
This is
authority,
beautiful.
not
So
just
headship of the husband is not
sacrificial
about
authority. He
ruling
has
power or
real
degradation of the
authority.
wife. God created both male and female, so they have different but complementary and equal roles. Today we
Equal
don't
roles?
have that anymore. There's no more male or female functions. They're completely wiping that out. Everything's gender neutral, and everyone should have the same role.
It's gender neutral because women don't have to have kids anymore. So you can't define woman because of NFP. She can be just as manly as he. He doesn't have babies, and now she doesn't have babies. So there's no more gender roles. That's why we have all this garbage in Ephesians 5.
There isn't. This isn't true. Men and women are different but equal. You know, I used to watch the shows, my 3 favorite shows, where everybody loves Raymond
keep
Holman
going. It's too stupid.
in marriage or in society when there's no family leader.
Sorry, too stupid.
Men out there, if you're not following the music of God, you will. So I want to finish by saying the Catholic Church is not anti-women. You know,
No one's-
it's equality. Jesus loved women.
I think it's Cornelius a Lapide and St. Thomas Aquinas. Men excel in dignity and intelligence because the women sin first, but man was created first. Okay, I can show you the quotes on that. That doesn't fly very much anymore, but that's the deal.
Befriended women. In fact, many supported him in his ministry. A cloistered nun is actually a higher calling than a diocesan priest. Not based on that he can do the mass, of course, that's the highest, but in the way of life. Because that calling is higher. She can't be a priest only because the priest is in persona Christi in Christ. Is by virtue of being the father, is not a husband who lays down his life for his bride and puts her ahead of himself. He has no business pointing to that passage saying, be submissive to
Oh, we got to go back to that.
is the heart. And as he occupies the chief place in leading,
to
she
this.
ought to claim
This
for
isn't
herself
cool.
the chief place in love. All right, so the last couple comments. But if a husband is not a husband who lays down his life for his bride and puts her ahead of himself, he has no business pointing to that passage saying, be submissive to me.
So you're putting conditions on Ephesians 5. So she can say also he could say, if she doesn't submit to me, or I'm going to get my brain working here. He's saying the wife is saying, I don't have to submit if he doesn't, quote, lay down his life for me, in other words, do what I want or whatever. And then by the same token, he could say, I don't have to love if she doesn't submit to me. So she has no business pointing to Ephesians 5 and saying, husbands, love your wives, if she doesn't submit. That's how stupid it is. She has to submit no matter what he does. Submit to everything but sin, okay? He has to love no matter what she does. Just like Christ loved the church, but he is in authority. This is stupid, dude, because it is like totally emasculation. This is simp city. Do what the wife wants or you're wrong. It's crazy. This is like so boomer JP2 90s stuff.
Because he has skin in the game. And when wives are told to be subject to their husbands, it has nothing to do with status. Two persons can be equal in status, but subordinate one to the other. Look at the Trinity. Were the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit equal? Yes, they were. But the Son subordinated himself to the Father. That doesn't mean he was inferior. That's not what the church means when it says that passage in Ephesians. In the Trinity...
Yes, but the church is... Christ has ruling power over the church and not vice versa. And the husband has ruling power over the wife and not vice versa. But then you cannot say marriage is unity, because if you say marriage is unity, then when someone exercises their authority, you might not be feeling the union. Kind of like when the cop says, pull over, get out of your car. You might not be feeling the union right there. He has authority. Otherwise, you could just say, hey, mutual submission, bro. You get back in your car. It's like, nuh-uh. Marriage doesn't work that way.
All three were equal, but the Son was subordinated to the Father and the Holy Spirit was subordinated to the Son. All right, God bless you all. You know, submission, sub means under. Doesn't mean less than. So submission means putting yourself under your husband's mission. And what's your husband's mission? Remember the three objectives of marriage? Get your spouse to heaven.
Yeah, okay, whatever. Yes, so you've got to let him do his job. And if he says, we're going to do whatever, this, that, or the other thing, it's from the Lord. You fear your husband.
So your husband, this is true love, is on a mission to get you to heaven. And you have to follow in that mission. That's not a bad thing. It means allowing him to serve you as head of your household. That service is for protection, not domination, men. You don't dominate. It's like the secret service.
No. Old Testament, it says dominion. You're supposed to have dominion over your wife. You do dominate. You don't have to be a jerk, but you do dominate. Okay, just like Christ dominates the church. He does.
Their job is to protect the president, not to dominate him. It's the same in marriages. So wives, give your husbands a chance. If he fails, then you take over. And some of you...
If he fails, if he fails, let him keep failing. You just stare at him and say, well, where's the money or whatever, but you don't take over. If he doesn't do what I want, you wear the pants. God. Like feminist stuff, man.
I'm sure many of you have had to do that. God bless you. And may the grace of Almighty God help you in that endeavor.
That's a frickin' wrap. Thank you, Father Alar. Well, we sure tried hard on that one, didn't we? It's been nice. Anyway, like I said, I'll take some likes and subscribes. I wish I could count the dislikes, but if you want to debate, if you want to tell me I'm wrong, please don't be shy, and you will get as many responses from me as you ask questions. As the hillbilly said in Bugs Bunny, till doomsday. Groovy. All right. God bless. Peace out.
We'll get that critter if it takes until doomsday.
And now you're home. Bow to your partner. Bow to the gent across the hall. And that is all.